She looked at my plate, scrunched her nose, and said, "I wouldn't even feed this to a stray dog." Yeah, that's how dinner started. Hey, I'm Mark. And this is the story of how my girlfriend, Lena, trashed my cooking every damn day, until she had no choice but to beg for it. So let's rewind. I've always loved cooking. Nothing fancy, just good, homemade meals. My dad was a chef, so I picked up a thing or two from him. But for some reason, Lena acted like my food was the worst thing she'd ever seen. Didn't matter what I made, steak, pasta, soup. She always had something to say. Tonight was no different. I placed a plate of homemade lasagna in front of her, proud as hell of how it turned out. But instead of appreciation, I got that disgusted look. Seriously, Mark? This looks like a 5-year-old made it. Do you even follow recipes? She poked at it with her fork like I had just served her roadkill. I exhaled slowly, keeping my cool. Just try it. I spent hours on this. She took the tiniest bite, chewed dramatically, then gagged. Nope, absolutely not. This tastes like disappointment. I clenched my jaw. It's literally homemade lasagna. You love lasagna. I love good lasagna. This tastes like you boiled cardboard and layered it with sadness. And then, as if to make a point, she stood up, grabbed my plate, and dumped the entire thing into the trash. I just stared. That was the 3rd time this week. "I'll just order from that new Italian place," she announced, already scrolling through her phone. "We should really stick to professionals, babe. Cooking just isn't your thing." Now here's the thing. I wasn't looking for a medal or anything. But throwing my food away right in front of me, that shit hurt. And what pissed me off the most? She never even tried cooking herself. Ever. If it wasn't takeout, she wasn't interested. So I sat there, watching her track her delivery, wondering why the hell I was even trying anymore. "You know," I muttered, more to myself than to her, "one day, you might not have a choice." She laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh, please. Like I'd ever be stuck somewhere eating your sad little meals." I forced a smile. "Yeah, imagine that. Because the funny thing about life? It has a way of flipping the script when you least expect it." And Lena? She was about to learn that the hard way. I swear, I could serve this woman a meal prepared by a 5-star chef, and she'd still find a way to shit on it. It's been a few days since the lasagna incident. But, of course, Lena hasn't let it go. Every time I step into the kitchen, she sighs dramatically, like she's watching a crime being committed. "What are you making now?" she asks, peeking over my shoulder. Her voice already carries that familiar tone of judgment. "Chicken stir-fry," I reply, chopping vegetables. "Something quick and healthy." She makes a face. "Jesus, Mark. Do you ever make anything that doesn't look like hospital food?" I grip the knife a little tighter. "It's stir-fry." "Yeah, and it looks like sadness in a pan." I take a deep breath. "You know, maybe if you actually helped instead of just standing there criticizing everything, you'd realize cooking isn't some mystical art." She scoffs, sitting down at the counter. "Why would I waste my time? There are people who are actually good at this. It's called delivery." And there it is. It's not just that she doesn't like my cooking. She doesn't respect the idea of making food at all. She sees it as beneath her, something only other people should do. It's not about taste. It's about control. I finish cooking in silence, serving myself a plate. I don't even bother giving her any. "Oh, come on," she says. "I'll try it. Maybe this time it won't be a disaster." I hesitate for a second. Maybe, just maybe, she'll finally appreciate the effort. She takes a bite, chews slowly, and I hold my breath. Then she grimaces. "Ugh. Nope. Bland as hell. What is this, diet food?" Something in me snaps. "Then make something yourself, Lena." She blinks. "Excuse me. You heard me. You've never cooked a damn thing since we started dating. You just sit there and order takeout like some spoiled princess. So go ahead. Make something." She scoffs again, but I see something in her eyes, hesitation. That's when it hits me. She can't. She literally doesn't know how. I smirk. "That's what I thought." She crosses her arms. "I just don't want to waste my time. Right? Because boiling water is so time-consuming." She glares at me, and I realize I've struck a nerve. But before I can say anything else, she grabs her phone and orders delivery. Again, I watch her scroll through the menu, a thought creeping into my head. One day, she won't have that option. And when that day comes, I wonder what she'll do. "This is your fault," Lena huffed, arms crossed, staring out at the endless stretch of trees surrounding us. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to stay calm. How exactly is this my fault, Lena? You were the one who insisted on taking this scenic route. She rolled her eyes. Yeah, well, I didn't think we'd end up stranded in the middle of nowhere with no gas and zero cell service. That made two of us. We were supposed to be at a cabin by now, enjoying a weekend away from the city. But thanks to a miscalculated fuel stop and the fact that the nearest gas station was miles behind us, we were now stuck on an empty mountain road with nothing but trees and silence for company. Help will come, I said, more to convince myself than her. It's just a matter of time. A matter of time, she mocked. Great. That's super comforting. I sighed and got out of the car, grabbing my backpack. Well, at least we have food. Oh no, she said immediately, shaking her head. I am not eating whatever weird survival shit you packed. I looked at her deadpan. It's just sandwiches and granola bars, Lena. It's not weird survival shit. She wrinkled her nose. That's even worse. God, I should have grabbed something from that last diner. Yeah, that probably would have been a good idea, I muttered, handing her a sandwich anyway. Here, just eat something. She didn't even look at it. I'll wait. Wait for what? A food delivery drone to drop from the sky. I snapped. There's no takeout here, Lena. This is what we have. She crossed her arms tighter. I'll wait. Fine. Let her wait. Let her sit there, stomach growling, while she clung to that ridiculous pride of hers. The first night passed, cold and frustrating. By morning, I had already eaten my share, but she still hadn't touched anything. She was pale, tired, clearly hungry, but she wouldn't admit it. Day 2 hit harder. Lena was visibly weaker, her snarky comments replaced by silence. She avoided looking at the food, but I caught her staring when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Just eat something. I tried again. I'm fine, she muttered, her voice quieter than usual. She wasn't fine, but she'd rather starve than admit she was wrong. I sat back against the car and watched her, waiting. She could hold out, sure, but how much longer? Because whether she liked it or not, she had no choice. And deep down, she knew it. Lena was different today. She didn't snap at me, didn't roll her eyes, or make some sarcastic comment about how exciting it was to be stranded in the middle of nowhere. She just sat there, pale, her back pressed against the car door, staring out into the woods. You okay? I asked, even though I knew the answer. She licked her lips, her voice dry. Fine. Bullshit. Her arms were wrapped around her stomach, and I knew why. 3 days. That's how long it had been since she ate anything. And no matter how stubborn she was, her body wasn't playing along with her pride anymore. I tossed a granola bar onto her lap. Eat. She didn't even look at it. Not hungry. Lena. I said I'm fine. I exhaled sharply, pushing myself up. Suit yourself. I walked a few steps away, pretending not to notice how her hands trembled as she adjusted her jacket. She was breaking, whether she wanted to admit it or not. By midday, she was restless. She shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the trees, then back at the granola bar, then back at the trees. And then, out of nowhere, she did something that actually surprised me. She got up. Where are you going? I asked. She shot me a glare, weaker than usual. I'll find my own food. I almost laughed. Almost. You sure about that? She ignored me and started walking toward the trees. I let her go. I wanted to see how far she'd take this. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Then I heard it. A rustling, a sharp yelp, and then, oh, for fuck's sake. I turned the corner to find Lena tangled in a bush, one shoe missing, her hair a mess. I leaned against a tree, crossing my arms. Find anything good? She glared up at me, cheeks flushed with frustration. Shut up. Not so easy, huh? She groaned, finally admitting defeat, and let me help her up. She was exhausted. Her pride was barely holding together. But for the first time, I saw it. Doubt. She wasn't sure she was right anymore. And that was a start. Lena wasn't the same person anymore. Her usual sharp remarks had dulled to mumbled words, barely audible. Her movements were slow, shaky. The arrogance in her eyes had been replaced by something I never thought I'd see in her, desperation. 5 days without food will do that to you. I caught her staring at me more often now, but not in the way she used to. She wasn't judging me. She was watching what I was eating, calculating, waiting. I knew what was coming before it even happened. That night, I pretended to sleep. I lay still, breathing steady, listening to the quiet rustling beside me. A shuffle, a pause. Then, the faintest creak of plastic being lifted. I opened my eyes. Lena. She froze. My granola bar was halfway out of my backpack, her trembling fingers gripping it like a lifeline. Her face was pale, lips chapped, eyes wide with guilt. For the first time in our entire relationship, Lena looked afraid. Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard. I need your food. The words hit harder than I expected. She had spent months mocking everything I made, calling it disgusting, refusing to eat it. And now, here she was, admitting what I already knew. She had no choice. I sat up slowly, watching her. What happened to waiting for takeout? Her eyes flickered with something. Anger, shame, maybe both. She clenched her jaw, but her body betrayed her. She was too weak to fight. I sighed, reached into my bag, and pulled out another bar. I tossed it to her. Eat. She hesitated for only a second before ripping open the wrapper like a starving animal. She took a bite. Then another. Then another. I watched in silence as she devoured the whole thing. And when it was gone, she licked the crumbs off her fingers, breathing heavily. She looked up at me, eyes burning. Don't say it. I smirked. Say what? That you told me so. I leaned back against the car, stretching my arms behind my head. Wouldn't dream of it. She let out a weak, bitter laugh. 5 days ago, she would have rather starved than admitted I was right. Now, she was eating the same food she had once called trash. Funny how things change. Lena chewed slowly, her hands trembling around the food I gave her. I watched her, waiting for the inevitable complaint, the sarcastic remark, the usual sneer. But none of that came. Instead, she closed her eyes, swallowed, and exhaled shakily. This is the best thing I've ever eaten. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I knew, for the first time in her life, she was being completely honest. She took another bite, eating like someone who had just realized how fragile they were. No more pride, no more arrogance, just hunger and desperation. 5 days had stripped her down to the core, and what was left was someone who finally saw the world differently. I leaned against the car, arms crossed. Better than takeout. She gave a weak, breathy laugh. Way better. The silence stretched between us. I could see it in her eyes. Something had changed. She wasn't the same Lena who had mocked me, who had thrown my food away like it was garbage. That version of her had been crushed under the weight of her own ego and 5 days of starvation. And yet, I wasn't sure if I cared. I should have felt triumphant. I should have enjoyed this moment. But all I felt was tired. She swallowed another bite and looked up at me. Mark. I raised a hand, cutting her off. Don't. Her mouth shut instantly. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Lena, you don't get to just say some magic words and undo everything. You spent months tearing me down, treating me like I was nothing because you thought my food wasn't good enough. And now, suddenly, after 5 days without a meal, you see me differently? She flinched, guilt flashing across her face. I was wrong. I finished for her. Yeah, you were. But that doesn't mean we just go back to how things were. She stared at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than stubbornness. I saw fear. Real, raw fear. Because she knew she had lost something she couldn't get back that easily. Mark, please, she whispered. I get it now. I do. I let out a slow breath and shook my head. I don't know if that's enough. She didn't reply, just sat there, holding what was left of the food, her fingers gripping it like it was the only thing tethering her to reality. I stood up and stretched. Get some rest. You'll need it. She didn't ask why. She just nodded, her eyes full of something I couldn't quite name. Regret, maybe. Or maybe, for the first time in her life, she was afraid of being alone. Lena sat across from me, her arms wrapped around her knees, her face pale and tired. She had eaten. She had swallowed her pride. But now came the part where she had to face everything else. She sniffed, wiping her face. I was awful to you. I know that now. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her, studying her expression. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that this experience had changed her. But had it? You didn't just insult my cooking, Lena, I said finally. You made me feel like nothing. Like my effort, my time, my care meant nothing. She flinched but nodded. I know. Do you? I tilted my head. Or do you just hate that you ended up in this position? That you needed me? Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not yet. She took a shaky breath. I was wrong. I was selfish, arrogant, and cruel. I don't have an excuse for it. I didn't realize how much I took for granted. I exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand down my face. I don't know if I can forgive you, Lena. That hit her harder than anything else. She looked at me with wide, desperate eyes. Mark, I held up a hand. No, don't beg. Don't try to fix it with words. That's what you always do, right? A little charm, a little sweet talking, and everything goes back to how it was. She stayed silent, her lips pressed together. I sighed, looking up at the sky. I don't think I even want what we had before. I spent so much time trying to prove myself to you. And for what? For you to laugh at me? To throw my effort in the trash? Her shoulders shook as she cried. I can change. Maybe, I said. But I don't know if I care anymore. I stood up, stretching my sore muscles. The road was still empty, the trees surrounding us like silent witnesses to everything that had happened. Lena stayed on the ground, hugging herself, her body trembling. For once, she had nothing to say. No snarky remark. No comeback. Just silence. And maybe that was the first real sign of change. I'm going for a walk, I said finally. You should think about what happens next. She looked up at me, eyes full of something. Fear, regret, maybe both. You're coming back, right? I didn't answer. I just turned and walked into the trees, leaving her alone with her thoughts. For the first time, she had to sit with everything she had done. And this time, there was no escaping it. The sun was setting, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and purple. I stood at the edge of the clearing, staring at the empty road ahead, my thoughts tangled in a mess I couldn't sort out. Behind me, Lena sat on the ground, arms wrapped around her knees. She hadn't spoken since I walked away hours ago. She just sat there, staring at nothing, lost in thoughts of her own. I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. Lena. She looked up, her eyes hollow, tired. Yeah. I hesitated. For the first time in days, I saw her for what she really was. Not the arrogant, sharp-tongued woman who threw my food away, but someone stripped of all that bravado. Someone vulnerable. Do you get it now? I asked. Do you really? She nodded weakly. Yeah, I do. I wanted to believe her. But the thing about people? They don't change overnight. So what happens now? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. That was the question, wasn't it? I had the power here. She knew it. And for the first time, I did too. I reached into my backpack, pulled out the last granola bar, and held it in my hand. Her eyes locked onto it instantly, her breath hitching. She was starving. 5 days had reduced her to the same desperate state I had been in when she mocked me for trying to cook for her. And now? Now she was waiting for me to decide if she got to eat. The irony wasn't lost on me. You judged my food, I said, turning the bar in my fingers. Now, it's time for me to judge you. She swallowed hard. Mark, please. I looked at her, really looked at her. Would giving her this food mean I forgave her? Did I even want to? A part of me wanted to let her sit there and suffer. To make her feel, just for a little longer, what it was like to be powerless. Another part of me wasn't sure I could. I crouched down in front of her, holding the bar between us. Tell me, Lena, if we get out of here, what happens next? Do we go back to the way things were? Do you forget all of this and call for takeout the second we're home? Her lip trembled. No. I swear, Mark. I see it now. I was awful to you. I don't deserve your help, but I'm begging you. Please. I searched her face for lies. For the woman who had laughed at me, thrown my efforts in the trash. But she wasn't there anymore. Just a woman who had learned, the hard way,